This video is going to introduce you to some strategies for reading primary texts in philosophy, and then we'll apply those strategies to reading the beginning of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. The first thing you need to do when you're reading a text is find the structure of a text. As good writers yourself, you know that you plan how you're going to organize your writing. Often you have an outline. If you can figure out what the author's outline was for the text, you're going to go a long way towards comprehending the text well. Reading a difficult text is a skill. It's not magic, it's not an innate ability. It's a skill you can learn, like riding a bike. Now, the first time you get onto a bike, you may look pretty awkward, but later it seems effortless. So when you see another student who seems to just get it, and you think, wow, what is it about them that they get philosophy and I don't, I just don't get it. Remember that you can learn how, just like riding the bike. Eventually, it's going to be second nature. You need to know what to look for. Now, we've already done the videos on logic, so you know to look for premise indicators and conclusion indicators, which will give you some sense of the flow of the logic of the text. But you also want to be aware of the text's context and purpose. Where did it come from? Where was it written? Who is the author speaking to? We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then we will go on to talk about how to discover the structure of the text. Let's talk about context. Just ask yourself some simple questions. Who is this author? Beyond just the name, where did this person grow up? What was he or she affected by? Who is the audience? Now, you know we speak differently to different people. I'll explain something to you as a student in a very different way than I'd explain it to my mother or a 3-year-old child. So consider the audience, and that will help you to follow how the author is speaking about his topic. It's helpful to know what's going on in the world as the author is addressing her or his audience. There's a certain shared understanding of the news of the day, the political situation, that kind of thing, that the author and the audience just assume as part of the text. But now, a lot of our texts in philosophy we're reading thousands of years after they were written, so we will have to inform ourselves of the things that were common knowledge to the people at the time. Last, what is the purpose? Any author who's going to take the time to write something, especially back when writing involved actually handwriting something on papyrus, had to have a good reason to do so. By understanding the motivation of the author, you can often see elements of the text you would otherwise miss. So let's apply these questions to the Nicomachean Ethics. The author we know is Aristotle. But let's learn a little bit about his background. Aristotle was born in a place called Macedonia, which is northeast of Athens. So when he traveled to Athens at the age of 17, he was like an international student. He was a foreigner in Athens. And he came to Athens to study at Plato's Academy. At the Academy, Aristotle was a standout. He was clearly one of Plato's favorite students. Plato had a special nickname for him, everything. He was just brilliant. And he stayed there in Athens for 20 years, learning from Plato and being involved in the philosophical discussions of the day. Then, when Aristotle was about 37 in the year 347 BCE, Plato dies. At this point, the major attraction for Athens has been removed. But at the same time, an anti-Macedonian sentiment had arisen in Athens, and Aristotle actually did not feel safe remaining in the city. So he went back home to Macedonia. Once there, he was asked by Philip of Macedonia, the king, to tutor his son, and Aristotle was willing to do this. For 10 years, He tutored the young Alexander, who would go on to become Alexander the Great. When Aristotle was 49, Alexander took up his political and military responsibilities and no longer needed a tutor. Also, the mood in Athens had changed, so Aristotle went back to the city and opened his own school, the Lyceum. What is really amazing about the Lyceum is it remained a vital intellectual institution for 500 years. Aristotle himself taught there for about a dozen years, and the writing we have now are his lecture notes from his classes on ethics that he gave at the Lyceum. But it's important to know something else about Aristotle. He's a systematic thinker. Aristotle is actually the first ever zoologist. He systematized logic for the first time. He wrote about literature. He wrote about politics, ethics, metaphysics, natural science, everything. So when Aristotle's writing, all this other stuff is in his mind. He sees knowledge as one large cohesive system, and anything he tells you about one part will match everything else from the others. So look for elements of other sciences in this book of ethics. Aristotle died at the age of 61. At that time, his son Nicomachus decided to publish Aristotle's lectures on ethics, and that is what we have now. The audience then is Aristotle's students. These are his lecture notes. Each time he gave a lecture, he was probably faced with different kinds of challenges, questions from the students, things they didn't understand, examples that maybe didn't work, and he'd go in and amend his notes. So by the time Nicomachus gets a hold of them, they were probably very messy, with lots of little things crammed into the margins, things scratched out, things added. Remember that Aristotle not once but twice felt he had to leave the city of Athens for his own safety. He sees the world as a huge, comprehensive system, a cohesive one, at least in the form of knowledge, but the political situation was not cohesive. And so as he's working on this project of developing a philosophy, he's very aware of the political instability of his times and is trying to think of how all of this could help people have a broad picture that would stabilize their relationships with one another. When Nicomachus writes this down, he wants to hold on to all the valuable things that Aristotle said. When he edits, he's very cautious. He doesn't make any huge editorial decisions. So you will find places in the text where it seems Aristotle gets off track. Nicomachus didn't want to presume to remove something his father had written now that his father was gone and couldn't weigh in on that decision. So you may find the text a little bit unwieldy. It's an accumulated series of notes from 12 years of lectures. So how can we figure out the structure of this text? Here are some simple strategies that will work on almost any text, especially in philosophy. Read your text one paragraph at a time. After you've read one paragraph, actually set the text off somewhere where you're not looking directly at it. And then open up a Word document or get out a sheet of paper and try to summarize for yourself in one, maybe two sentences, the main point of that paragraph. Your author has structured a text so that each paragraph is one step down a road trying to lead you to the understanding he's trying to impart or she's trying to impart to you. So if you can encapsulate each of those statements in one sentence or maybe two, you will begin to see the structure, just the general outline of the text. Having done that, you will now have a list of statements and you know what's coming next. If you number those statements and arrange them, you may be able to find an argument in the text. Remember that some of the statements may be informational and not serve a direct purpose in the flow of the logic, but many of them will, especially in a text in philosophy. So then you can draw a diagram. Now this is a hypothetical diagram of a 4-paragraph text, and all I've done is made a list of the 4 main points and tried to see how they fit together logically. Sometimes, however, you will find one paragraph that you realize there's a lot going on here, and there may be sub-arguments within that paragraph. When you do that, just dig a little deeper into that one paragraph and unpack it. Now, if you look at this second diagram, you will see that the structure of 1 to 2 and then 2 and 3 together leading to 4 is exactly the same. I've gone back to only two of these paragraphs, and unpacked sub-arguments from within them. In the first paragraph, the author gave 3 reasons to support the topic sentence of that paragraph. And in the third paragraph, it appears there's a deductive argument with 2 premises leading to the conclusion, which is the topic of paragraph 3. Let's go back to that earlier diagram, the one with the 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you can come into any class with that much detail, ready to discuss a text, you are going to be well prepared to get the most you can out of that professor's lecture or discussion. You're going to ask the right questions, and you're going to have a basic scaffolding to put the information onto as your questions get answered. So let's take these strategies to the Nicomachean Ethics. I'm going to ask you to read only certain parts of the first few books of the Nicomachean Ethics. Read all of sections 1 and 2, each of which is only 1 paragraph. Skip section 3 and go on and read the first paragraph of section 4. Then skip the rest of section 4 and read section 5. Now wait a minute. Didn't I just tell you that an author plans each paragraph as one step down a path to lead you to the conclusion that she or he wants you to accept? Now I'm asking you to skip things that doesn't make sense. But remember, we're bringing to the text the context and purpose that we've already unearthed. We know that these are lecture notes, that there are, in fact, rabbit trails, and that Nicomachus did not want to edit out anything that might be important to his father. So I am telling you that section 3 and the second half of section 4 aren't really needed for you to understand the flow of logic. But don't take my word for it alone. If you look at your text and look at the first 3 words of section 4, you will see this. Let us resume. Let's get back on track, Nicomachus adds as an editorial note, signaling to us that section 3 was a bit of a rabbit trail, and now it's to get back on to where we were going. Section 5 begins with the same 3 words. So this is not an arbitrary decision on my part. I'm actually able to see in the text an indication that section 3 and the second half of section 4 can be skipped. You can do this too. I really want you to believe and to understand that you can gather these skills and soon be able to read primary texts on your own, recognizing these kinds of signals and being able to find the structure of the text. One more thing before you get started. There's a word Aristotle uses throughout the Nicomachean Ethics that we need to understand in the context of his day. That word is eudaimonia. I've written it in Greek letters to the left. That's exactly the way Aristotle would have written it, and then transliterated it into a form we can pronounce on the right. Eudaimonia. Now your translator is W.D. Ross, and Terence Irwin is the translator of the definitive set of the complete works of Aristotle, and both of them will translate eudaimonia as happiness. So this is the word you're going to see when you read. But other translators disagree. For example, Martha Nussbaum, who is a living philosopher teaching in Chicago, translates eudaimonia as flourishing. And I agree that Martha is a little closer to the truth. Why? I have two reasons. First, the word eudaimonia literally means well-being. A daimon is a being, and eu, that prefix there, means good. You'll see it in many English words like euthanasia, which means a good death, or a eulogy, made of the prefix eu and the stem logos, or word. So a eulogy is a good word you say about someone, usually at their funeral. So looking at the etymology of the word, it means well-being. Think about that in terms of health and fullness and energy and vivacity. That is eudaimonia. That is a little richer than our current understanding of the word happiness, which we use in contemporary times to kind of mean feeling good, feeling comfortable, wanting to laugh a little bit, happiness. It doesn't have that deep richness that well-being or flourishing would convey. The second reason that I think Nussbaum's translation may be superior is that Aristotle himself makes a distinction between eudaimonia and pleasure. When you get to section 5, he will consider whether or not happiness is pleasure, and he'll reject that idea. So since he draws a distinction between our current understanding of happiness as just feeling good and this richer, deep experience of well-being, it would be wise each time you see the word happiness to simply remind yourself, that's that word, eudaimonia. Now, I've told you a number of times that this is a skill you can learn and that you can read these primary texts on your own. And now I've given you all this important background information, the biography of Aristotle's life, the etymology of the word eudaimonia, the story of Nicomachus writing this down. How could you possibly have known that? Well, in the future, whenever you have to read a primary text in philosophy, it's helpful to also read a secondary text where someone like myself, someone who has a background in the field, gives you that kind of overview. Frequently, you can find that in an introduction or translator's preface to the text you're reading. But you can also go online and get something like, say, SparkNotes as just a guide. Remember, however, that those kinds of texts are the training wheels on the bike you're learning to ride, and eventually you want to take them off and ride on your own. SparkNotes is helpful to give you this background so you can unpack the text, but don't rely on it without actually reading the text. You will find that there's so much more going on in the text than any of these summaries can cover, and that you can interpret the text in new and exciting ways that you might miss if you don't read it for yourself. All right, it's time to get to work. Grab your copy of the Nicomachean Ethics, read the sections I've outlined, come up with your list of statements, and try to draw a diagram. I'll see you in class.